The sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky in bright shades of orange and pink. It was a beautiful sight, but for Amara Okoye it felt like a cold fire. She sat in the very last row of the beach wedding, her back straight and her head held high. Her gold satin dress caught the fading light, glowing like a flame. Gold was the color of a queen. But today, Amara felt like a ghost watching her own life disappear. Under a white arch covered in roses, the man she loved was kissing another woman. Ethan Caldwell looked perfect in his tan suit. He held the bride's waist with a look of pure joy. The bride was Isabella Hart, the woman Amara had called her best friend since they were little girls. As they pulled apart, the guests stood up and cheered. Amara's mother smiled and clapped, looking like this was the happiest day ever. Or she didn't even look back at the daughter sitting alone in the shadows. Amara's heart felt like it was being crushed. She had spent 5 years building Ethan's dreams. She had used her own money to start his business. She had even paid for the ring that was now shining on Isabella's finger. She had been the strong one for everyone, helping Isabella with her bills and listening to Ethan's problems late into the night. Now they were using her hard work to celebrate her replacement. A single tear ran down Amara's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She didn't move. She just watched the two people who meant the most to her break her heart in public. She felt invisible, like a tool that had been used and then thrown away once the job was done. But Amara was not as alone as she thought. Standing 20 feet away near a dark, expensive car was a man who didn't fit in with the happy crowd. Kang Jae-hyun stood perfectly still in a sharp black suit. His face was handsome but cold, like it was carved out of stone. While everyone else was looking at the happy couple, Jae-hyun's dark eyes were locked onto Amara. He didn't care about the wedding or the flowers. He was there for her. He remembered the night 3 years ago when the world was dark and he was bleeding out in an alley. Amara was the only one who didn't run away. She had saved his life without asking for anything in return. Jae-hyun watched the way Amara sat, composed, quiet, and strong even in her pain. He saw the way the others ignored her. A dangerous light flickered in his eyes. He knew what it felt like to be betrayed, and he knew exactly what Amara needed. Before this day was over, Amara would realize that being the strong one didn't mean she had to suffer alone. The man everyone feared had already chosen her, and he was about to give her the power to take back everything she had lost. The memory of that night 3 years ago always started with the rain. It was a cold, heavy rain that turned the streets of San Francisco into dark mirrors. Amara had just finished a long shift at the clinic. Her feet were tired, and her white coat was folded neatly in her bag. She was taking a shortcut through a narrow alley to get to her car. Most people avoided these dark paths, but Amara had always been brave. She believed that if you were a good person, the world would be good to you. She was halfway through the alley when she heard a low, wet sound. It sounded like someone trying to breathe through water. Amara stopped. She didn't run. Instead, she turned on her phone light and pointed it toward a pile of trash cans. There, slumped against the cold brick wall, was a man. He was wearing a black suit that looked very expensive, but it was ruined. It was soaked with rain and thick, dark blood. His face was pale and his eyes were half closed. Amara saw the way his hand was pressed against his chest. Even in the dark, she could tell he was dying. She could also see things that would have made any other woman scream. There were tattoos on his neck, sharp, dark designs that looked like dragon scales. Beside him on the wet ground lay a heavy metal object that glinted in her light. It was a gun. Amara knew this man belonged to a world of violence. He was part of the darkness that most people only saw in movies. But as she looked at him, she didn't see a criminal or a monster. She only saw a person who was in pain. "Don't move," she said. Her voice was calm and firm, the way it always was when things got difficult. The man's eyes snapped open. Even though he was weak, his gaze was sharp and terrifying. He reached for the weapon on the ground, but his fingers were too shaky. He looked at Amara with a mix of surprise and anger. He didn't expect a woman in a gold necklace and a soft sweater to be standing over him in a place like this. "Leave," he whispered. His voice was a rough growl. "You shouldn't be here." Amara didn't listen. She knelt down in the dirty rainwater, not caring that her clothes were getting ruined. She opened her bag and pulled out a small medical kit she always carried. "I'm a doctor," she lied slightly, though she was still in training back then. "What? And you are bleeding to death. If I leave, you will be dead before the sun comes up." She reached out to move his hand away from the wound. For a second, his fingers gripped her wrist. His grip was like iron, even though he was losing so much blood. He looked deep into her eyes, trying to see if she was afraid. Amara didn't blink. She looked back at him with nothing but kindness. She wasn't judging him for his tattoos or the gun. She was just there to help. Slowly, the man let go. He slumped back against the wall, his breath coming in short gasps. Amara worked quickly. The rain felt like ice on her neck, but her hands were warm and steady. She used her scissors to cut away his silk shirt. There was a bullet hole just below his shoulder. It was deep and ugly. She used clean gauze to press down on the wound. Every time she pushed, the man moved in pain, but he didn't make a sound. He just watched her. He watched the way her brow furrowed in focus. He saw the way she didn't flinch at the blood on her hands. To Kang Jae-hyun, the world was a place where everyone wanted something. People only helped you if they were afraid of you or if you paid them. But this woman was different. She was saving his life in a muddy alleyway, and she didn't even know his name. "Why?" he managed to ask as she wrapped a tight bandage around his chest. Amara looked up. A strand of her dark hair had fallen across her face. She tucked it behind her ear with a bloody finger. "Because you are alive," she said simply, "and life is worth saving." She stayed with him for an hour, making sure the bleeding had stopped. She gave him water from her bottle and stayed until his color started to come back. When she was sure he was stable, she stood up and packed her bag. "I called a private taxi for you," she told him. "It will be at the end of the alley in 2 minutes. Tell them to take you to the address I wrote on this paper. It's a clinic that won't ask questions." Jae-hyun looked at the paper, then back at her. "You don't want money? You don't want a favor?" Amara shook her head. She gave him a small, tired smile. "Just try to stay out of alleys for a while." She turned and walked away into the rain. She never told Ethan about that night. She knew Ethan would have been scared or would have told her she was being foolish. She kept it as her own secret, a small moment of kindness in a dark world. But Jae-hyun never forgot. He sat in the rain and watched her gold-clad figure disappear into the fog. He had spent his whole life being a predator, a man who lived by the sword. He had never met someone who gave so much without wanting anything back. In that moment, a debt was born. It was a debt that could not be paid with money. It could only be paid with a life for a life. Standing at the wedding 3 years later, Jae-hyun looked at the woman in the gold dress. She was the same woman from the alley, still kind, still strong, but now she was the one who was wounded. This time the wound wasn't in her chest, it was in her heart. And as he watched Ethan and Isabella celebrate their betrayal, Jae-hyun decided it was time to pay his debt. He was going to show Amara that her kindness had bought her the most dangerous protector in the world. The wedding ceremony was over, and the guests began to move toward a large white tent on the grass. Inside, the air was filled with the smell of expensive flowers and the sound of a soft jazz band. It looked like a dream, but for Amara, it felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She walked slowly, her gold dress swishing around her legs. She found her seat at a table far in the back, hidden behind a large pillar. It was clear that Ethan and Isabella didn't want her to be seen. Waiters moved through the crowd, carrying trays of sparkling drinks and small snacks. Amara watched as Ethan laughed with his new business partners. He looked so confident. Isabella stood by his side, glowing in her white dress, accepting hugs from everyone. Amara remembered how she used to be the one standing there. She had been the one to introduce Ethan to those partners. She had been the one to edit his speeches and stay up late helping him plan his company. Now, she was just a guest who shouldn't have been invited. A young waiter with a serious face walked toward her table. He wasn't carrying a tray of drinks. Instead, he held a thick brown envelope. He stopped right in front of Amara and bowed his head slightly. "For you, Miss Okoye," he said in a low voice. Amara looked at the envelope. It was heavy. "I didn't order anything," she said, her voice shaking a little. "A friend wanted you to have this," the waiter replied. He set the envelope on the table and disappeared back into the crowd before she could ask another question. Amara felt a strange chill. She looked around the room and saw the man from earlier, Kang Jae-hyun. He was standing by the bar, holding a glass of dark liquid. He didn't look at her, but she knew the envelope came from him. With trembling fingers, she pulled the string and opened the flap. She expected to find a letter or maybe a photo. Instead, she found a stack of official-looking papers. There were bank statements, loan applications, and legal contracts. As she began to read, the noise of the party seemed to fade away. Her heart began to beat fast against her ribs. The first page was a bank statement for her personal inheritance account. This was the money her father had left her to make sure she was always safe. The balance at the bottom was 0. Every dollar had been moved out over the last 6 months. She looked at the names on the transfers. The money hadn't been stolen by a stranger. It had been moved into Ethan Caldwell's business account. Amara felt sick. She turned to the next page. It was a loan application for $200,000. The loan was for a charity foundation run by Isabella Hart. At the bottom of the page, there was a signature, Amara Okoye. Amara stared at the name. The handwriting looked just like hers. The loops of the letters and the way the A slanted were perfect. But she had never seen this paper in her life. She had never signed for a loan for Isabella. She realized then that Ethan had used his knowledge of her life to fake her name. He hadn't just left her, he had used her name to get money for the woman he was cheating with. She kept flipping through the papers. There were credit card bills for luxury hotels and jewelry stores. She saw charges for a diamond necklace bought 3 months ago, the same one Isabella was wearing around her neck right now at the altar. Ethan had bought his new wife's wedding gifts using Amara's stolen money. The final paper was the worst. It was a legal notice from a debt collection agency. Because the loans hadn't been paid back, the agency was coming after Amara. She wasn't just broke, she was in deep legal trouble. Ethan had planned this perfectly. He had waited until he had taken everything she owned before he left her. He wanted to make sure she was so crushed that she could never fight back. Amara looked up from the papers. Across the room, Ethan was lifting a glass of champagne. He looked at Isabella with so much love. It was all a lie. Their beautiful life was built on a foundation of theft. They were dancing on the ruins of her life. She looked back at the pillar where Jae-hyun was standing. He was finally looking at her. His eyes weren't full of pity. They were hard and steady, like they were waiting for her to make a choice. He had given her the truth. He had shown her that the people she loved were actually her worst enemies. Amara felt a change deep inside her. The sadness that had been weighing her down for weeks started to turn into something else. It was a cold, sharp anger. It was the kind of anger that didn't scream or cry. It was the kind of anger that wanted justice. She realized that Ethan and Isabella thought she was weak. They thought she would just sit in the back row and cry while they lived their perfect life. They didn't know that Amara was done being the strong one for them. She realized she had been holding up their world with her own hands, and it was time to let go and watch it crash. Amara tucked the papers back into the envelope. She gripped it tightly against her gold dress. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was a woman who had just found out she was at war. She looked at Ethan one last time, and for the first time that day, she didn't feel like crying. She felt like winning. She stood up, her gold gown shimmering, and prepared to walk out of the wedding and into a brand new life. The debt in the alleyway was about to be paid, and Ethan Caldwell was about to find out that Amara Okoye was the most dangerous person he had ever crossed. Amara did not stay for the toasts. She did not stay to see the cake being cut or to hear the laughter of the people who had stolen her life. She walked out of the white tent, her gold dress shimmering like a warning in the moonlight. The cool night air hit her face, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe. The heavy envelope was tucked under her arm, a weight that felt like both a burden and a weapon. A sleek black car was waiting at the edge of the parking lot. The driver, a tall man in a dark suit, opened the door without a word. Amara hesitated for only a second. She knew this car belonged to Kang Jae-hyun. She knew that getting into it meant stepping away from her old, safe life and into something much more dangerous. But as she looked back at the glowing wedding tent, she realized there was nothing left for her there but lies. She stepped into the car, and the door closed with a soft thud that sounded like a final goodbye. As the car drove through the winding streets of the city, passing the bright lights of downtown and the dark shadows of the tall buildings, they stopped in front of a private lounge that had no sign on the door. It was hidden away in a quiet part of the city where the rich and powerful came to speak in whispers. The driver led her inside, through a hallway of dark wood and soft carpets, to a private room at the very back. Kang Jae-hyun was sitting in a large leather chair, looking out a floor-to-ceiling window at the city below. He didn't turn around when she entered. He looked like a king watching over his kingdom. The only light in the room came from the city outside, casting long shadows across his sharp face. "You read the papers," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was low and steady, like the sound of a distant storm. "I did," Amara replied. She sat down in the chair across from him. She didn't hide the envelope. She placed it on the table between them. "Ethan took everything. My money, my name, and my future. He even used my money to buy the ring for the woman he cheated with." Jae-hyun turned his chair to face her. His dark eyes were cold, but they weren't unkind. "Ethan Caldwell is a small man who wants to be big. He thinks he is smart because he found a way to trick a woman who trusted him. He thinks that because you are a good person, you are a weak person." "I was weak," Amara whispered, looking down at her hands. "I let them use me." "No," Jae-hyun said, leaning forward. "You were loyal. Loyalty is a treasure, but it is wasted on people like Ethan and Isabella. In my world, we call those people parasites. They live off the strength of others until there is nothing left. Then they move on to the next person." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, slim silver tablet. He slid it across the table toward her. "This is what I call the equalizer." Amara looked at the device but didn't touch it. "What is it?" "It is power," Jae-hyun explained. "Inside that tablet is a team of people you cannot hire on your own. There are forensic accountants who can find every dollar Ethan moved. There are lawyers who do not care about being fair. They only care about winning. There are people who can find every secret Isabella Hart is trying to hide." Amara felt her heart skip a beat. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe me a whole team of people just because I helped you once." Jae-hyun's expression didn't change, but his eyes grew deeper. "But 3 years ago, you chose to save a man you didn't know. You didn't ask if I was a good man. You didn't ask for a reward. You just did what was right. In my world, that makes you more than a doctor. It makes you someone worth protecting." He stood up and walked to the window. "Ethan thinks he has won because he has the money and the girl, but he doesn't realize that his business is built on a foundation of your work. If you pull the thread, the whole thing will come apart. The equalizer gives you the thread." Amara looked at the silver tablet. She thought about the legal notices in the envelope. She thought about the empty bank account and the debt Ethan had left in her name. If she didn't fight back, she would spend the rest of her life paying for their happiness. "What do you want in return?" she asked quietly. Jae-hyun turned back to her. "I want you to take back what is yours. I want to see you stand at the top of this city while they fall to the bottom. I don't want your money, Amara. I have plenty of that. I want to pay my debt by making sure the world knows that Amara Okoye is not someone to be played with." Amara reached out and touched the cool metal of the tablet. She felt a spark of hope, but also a flicker of fear. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was a war. "They will call me a villain if I do this," she said. "My mother, our friends, they will all take their side." "Let them," Jae-hyun said. He walked over to her and stood tall. "A queen does not care what the servants say. You have been the supportive friend and the perfect fiancé for long enough. It is time to be the person you were always meant to be. But he's someone who is feared as much as she is loved." Amara stood up, gripping the equalizer in her hand. She looked at Jae-hyun, and for the first time she saw herself reflected in his dark eyes. She didn't see a victim. She saw a woman who was ready to burn down the lies and build something real. "Tell me what I need to do," she said. Her voice was no longer shaking. It was as firm and cold as the metal in her hand. Jae-hyun gave a small, dangerous smile. "First, we stop the honeymoon. Then we take back the crown." As Amara walked out of the lounge and back into the night, the city felt different. The lights didn't seem so mocking anymore. They looked like targets. She wasn't just a guest at a wedding anymore. She was the ghost that was going to haunt Ethan Caldwell until he had nothing left. The Black Dragon had given her the fire, and she was ready to let it burn. Amara sat at her small kitchen table. The room was dark except for the bright blue light of the silver tablet Jae-hyun had given her. Outside, the city was quiet, but inside Amara's head, a storm was brewing. She had spent so many years being the person who fixed everything. If Ethan's car broke down, she paid for the repair. If Isabella's shop was short on rent, Amara wrote the check. She was the engine that kept their lives moving. Now, she was about to turn that engine off. She tapped the screen of the equalizer. A list of bank accounts appeared. These were the accounts for Caldwell Developments, the company Ethan claimed was his. As she scrolled through the transactions, her eyes narrowed. There it was. Honeymoon expenses. Ethan had moved $50,000 into a private travel account just 2 days ago. It was her money. It was the profit from a project she had stayed up until 3 a.m. to finish while Ethan was out at dinner with Isabella. Amara felt a cold smile touch her lips. Ethan was probably at the airport right now. He was probably holding Isabella's hand, telling her about the 5-star hotel in Hawaii and the private boat they were going to rent. He thought he was a king. He didn't realize that he had forgotten one very important thing. Because Amara had built the company from nothing, her name was still on the legal paperwork as the primary owner. Ethan had been so busy planning his wedding and faking her signature on loans that he hadn't officially removed her from the bank system yet. He was too arrogant. He thought she was too broken to ever check. A message popped up on the tablet. It was from the forensic team Jae-hyun had provided. "Miss Okoye, the legal blocks are ready. With one command, we can flag these accounts for fraud. Since the signatures on the recent loans do not match your history, the bank will freeze everything immediately for an investigation." Amara looked at the freeze button on the screen. For a second, she thought about the strong girl she used to be. That girl would have worried about Ethan being embarrassed. That girl would have worried about Isabella crying at the airport. But that girl was gone. She had been buried under a pile of forged papers and stolen dreams. She pressed her finger to the screen. "Do it," she whispered into the empty room. The screen flashed green. "Accounts frozen. All credit cards issued to Ethan Caldwell and Isabella Hart have been deactivated." Amara leaned back in her chair. She imagined the scene at the luxury terminal. Ethan would hand over his black credit card to pay for the first-class tickets. The machine would beep. The clerk would try again. Then the clerk would look at Ethan with a confused face and say, "I'm sorry, sir. This card has been declined by the fraud department." She could almost see the look of shock on Ethan's face. He would try his other cards. They would all fail. He would try to log into the mobile app, but he would find himself locked out. The money he had stolen was no longer his to spend. The life he had built on her back was starting to crack. Amara felt a weight lift off her shoulders. For 5 years, she had carried the burden of making sure Ethan succeeded. She had carried the weight of his failures and his debts. Now, for the first time, she was the one in control. She wasn't just a nurse manager or a supportive friend. She was the person who held the keys to their kingdom, and she had just locked the door. She closed the tablet and stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the city. Far away, near the airport, the lights were blinking. She knew that somewhere out there, the man who had betrayed her was finally feeling a tiny bit of the panic she had felt at the wedding. This was only the beginning. She had stopped the honeymoon. Next, she would take back the rest. Amara Okoye was no longer sitting in the back row. She was finally standing up, and she wasn't going to stop until she was the only one left standing. As the next morning, the sun was bright over the city, but it did not feel warm to Isabella Hart. She stood inside her boutique, a beautiful shop with white walls and gold racks called the Hart Collection. Everything in the store looked perfect. The dresses were made of the finest silk, and the candles smelled like expensive vanilla. Isabella had spent years telling everyone that this shop was her dream, her hard work, and her soul. She didn't like to mention that Amara had been the one to sign the lease, pay the first 6 months of rent, and even organize the hangers. Isabella was pacing back and forth on the plush carpet. Her face was tight with worry. The glitch at the airport had ruined the start of her honeymoon. Ethan had spent all night on the phone with the bank, yelling about a mistake, but nothing had been fixed. They were stuck in the city, and Ethan was currently at his office trying to find out why his corporate accounts were frozen. "It's probably just a technical error," Isabella whispered to herself, smoothing her hair. She looked at her reflection in the tall, ornate mirror by the changing rooms. She looked like a successful business owner. She looked like a happy bride. She just needed to stay calm. The bell above the door chimed. Isabella put on her best owner smile and turned around. "Welcome to the Hart." Her voice stopped. 3 men in gray suits walked in. They weren't looking at the dresses. One of them held a black briefcase, and the other 2 were carrying tablets. They didn't look like customers. They looked like trouble. "Isabella Hart?" the man in the lead asked. He didn't smile. He showed her a badge. "Oh, I'm from the city business office. We are here with the tax department to perform an immediate audit of your business license and your startup funding." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. "An audit? Now? I just got married yesterday. There must be some mistake. My friend, my business partner, handles all the paperwork." "We are aware of Miss Okoye," the man said, looking down at his tablet. "However, a fraud alert was placed on the $200,000 loan used to open this boutique. Since the loan is now under investigation for identity theft, your business license has been suspended effective immediately. We need to see your books." "Identity theft?" Isabella squeaked. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She thought of the papers Ethan had told her not to worry about. He had told her that Amara wanted to help them. He had said it was Amara's way of saying thank you for their friendship. "I don't have the books," Isabella admitted, her voice trembling. "Amara has them. She does everything." "Not anymore," a voice said from the doorway. Isabella looked up. Amara was standing there. She wasn't wearing her medical scrubs or the soft sweaters Isabella was used to. She was wearing a sharp, dark suit that fit her perfectly. Her hair was pulled back and her eyes were as hard as diamonds. She looked powerful. She looked like a stranger. "Amara!" Isabella ran toward her, her hands reaching out as they always did when she needed something. "Thank goodness you're here. These men are saying crazy things. Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them you signed for the loan. You have to fix this, Jazz." "My shop is going to close." Amara stepped back, avoiding Isabella's touch. The movement was small, but it felt like a slap. "I'm not here to fix anything, Isabella," Amara said. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "I'm here to tell the truth. I never signed that loan. Ethan stole my name and you knew it. You took that money and bought these silk dresses while I was working double shifts to pay off the debts you both left me." "We were going to pay you back," Isabella cried, tears starting to ruin her makeup. "We're sisters, Amara. You've always taken care of me. You can't do this to me. Think about all our years together." "I did think about them," Amara said. She looked around the beautiful shop that had been built with her stolen life. "I thought about how I paid your rent when you decided you were too stressed to work. I thought about how I defended you when people said you were just using me. I was a sister to you, but you were a parasite. Amara looked at the men in the gray suits. I have provided the forensic team with the original signatures. As the primary owner of the lease, I am officially closing this business today. Please proceed with the audit. You can't, Isabella screamed. She looked at the mirror behind her, the one that showed her perfect life. But as she watched, one of the auditors bumped into a rack and the mirror shook. A long, jagged crack appeared right across Isabella's reflection. Amara didn't look at the crack. She didn't look at Isabella's tears. She simply turned her back. Amara, wait! Isabella grabbed her phone and dialed Amara's number, hoping for a glitch, hoping for the old, soft Amara to answer. Amara stopped and pulled her own phone from her pocket. She didn't answer it. Instead, she looked at the screen, swiped her finger, and looked Isabella right in the eye. The number you are calling is no longer in service for you, Amara said. She walked out of the boutique, the bell chiming one last time. Behind her, Isabella fell to her knees on the expensive carpet, surrounded by men in suits who were taking apart her life piece by piece. The friendship that had lasted 20 years was officially dead. Amara felt a cold, sharp peace. The mirror had cracked, and for the first time, Amara could see the world clearly. She wasn't the strong friend anymore. She was the storm. Amara returned to her apartment building as the evening shadows grew long. She felt a strange mix of tiredness and strength. For years, she had walked this path thinking about what Ethan needed for dinner or how to help Isabella with her latest drama. Today, for the first time, she was only thinking about herself. But as she reached the front glass doors of the lobby, she saw a familiar figure waiting for her. It was Ethan. He was no longer the polished, confident groom in the tan suit. His tie was pulled loose and his hair was messy. He looked like a man who had spent the day fighting a losing battle. When he saw Amara, he didn't look sorry. He looked furious. He marched toward her, his face red with anger. "What did you do, Amara?" he shouted. His voice echoed off the tall buildings, making a few people on the sidewalk stop and stare. "The bank has frozen every single account. My office is being audited. Isabella is at home crying because her shop is locked up. Do you have any idea what you're doing to us?" Amara stopped and stood her ground. She didn't let her voice shake. "I'm not doing anything to you, Ethan. I'm just letting the truth come out. If you hadn't stolen my money and faked my name, the bank wouldn't have a reason to freeze anything." Ethan stepped closer, trying to use his height to make her feel small. This was his old trick. Whenever Amara tried to stand up for herself in the past, he would tower over her and use a loud, scary voice until she backed down. "You're going to call the bank right now," he hissed, pointing a finger at her face. "You're going to tell them it was all a misunderstanding. If you don't, I will make sure you never work in this city again. I built this reputation, and I can destroy yours." In the past, Amara would have felt her heart race. She would have apologized just to make the shouting stop. But today she looked at him and saw something new. He wasn't a powerful man. He was a scared little boy who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar. He was a predator who had lost his claws. "You didn't build anything, Ethan," Amara said quietly. "I built it. You just put your name on the door and spent the money. And as for my reputation, I think the police will care more about your forged signatures than your opinion of me." Ethan's eyes widened. He grabbed her arm, his grip tight and mean. "Don't you walk away from me. You owe me. Without me, you're just a lonely nurse with no one. You need me." "She doesn't need anyone like you." The new voice was cold and sharp. It didn't need to be loud to be terrifying. Ethan froze. He slowly let go of Amara's arm and turned around. A large black car had pulled up silently to the curb. Standing beside the open door was Kang Jae-hyun. He looked like he had stepped out of a different world, a world where men didn't need to shout to get what they wanted. He didn't move toward them, but his presence felt like a heavy weight in the air. Two other men in dark suits stood behind him, their faces like stone. Jae-hyun walked forward slowly. Every step he took made Ethan look smaller and weaker. Jae-hyun didn't look at Ethan like an enemy. He looked at him like a bug he was about to step on. He stopped right next to Amara and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The touch was light, but it was a clear message. She is mine to protect. Is there a problem here? Jae-hyun asked. His dark eyes locked onto Ethan's. Ethan tried to puff out his chest, but his voice came out thin and shaky. This is a private matter. Who are you? Jae-hyun didn't answer. He didn't have to. One of his men stepped forward and handed Ethan a small card with a gold dragon crest on it. Ethan looked at the card, and Amara watched as the color completely left his face. He knew that name. Everyone in the city's high circles knew that the Black Dragon was not someone you argued with. Mr. Caldwell, Jae-hyun said, his voice smooth and dangerous. You have spent a lot of time taking things that do not belong to you. You took Miss Okoye's money. You took her time. You even tried to take her dignity. But your time is up. Jae-hyun leaned in closer to Ethan, whispering so only he could hear, but Amara saw Ethan's knees actually shake. If I see you near her again, or if I hear that you have spoken her name, I will not call a lawyer. I will handle it my way. Do you understand? Ethan couldn't even speak. He nodded quickly, his eyes darting toward his car. He didn't look like a successful businessman anymore. He looked like a coward. Without saying another word, he turned and ran toward his vehicle, almost tripping over his own feet. He drove away so fast that his tires shrieked against the pavement. Amara watched him go. She expected to feel bad for him, but all she felt was a deep sense of relief. The man who had controlled her life for 5 years had been chased away like a stray dog. She turned to Jae-hyun. He was still standing there, his hand still resting on her shoulder. The coldness in his eyes disappeared when he looked at her. Are you okay? He asked. I am, Amara said. And she realized it was true. I wasn't afraid of him. Jae-hyun gave a small, proud smile. I know you weren't, but you shouldn't have to deal with garbage like him alone. Amara looked at the dark car and the men waiting for him. She knew that by accepting Jae-hyun's protection, she was entering a dangerous world. But as she looked at his calm, steady face, she knew he would never use her the way Ethan did. He didn't want her to be his fixer. He wanted her to be his equal. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, Jae-hyun replied. We still have a lot of work to do. Ethan is running now, but we need to make sure he can never stand up again. Amara nodded. She walked into her building, her head held high. The predator had tried to scare her, but he had only succeeded in showing her how weak he truly was. With the shadow of the Black Dragon behind her, Amara knew that the game was just beginning, and this time she was the one holding all the cards. 2 days later, Amara found herself in a part of the city she had never visited. It was a quiet building made of gray stone and dark glass. There was no sign on the door, and the windows were tinted so dark that you couldn't see inside. This was the headquarters of Jae-hyun's cleaners. They were not the kind of people who cleaned floors. They were experts who cleaned up lives and uncovered secrets that were meant to stay buried. Jae-hyun led her through a heavy metal door that opened only after a facial scan. Inside, the room was filled with the soft hum of powerful computers and the glow of large monitors. 3 people sat at a long desk. They didn't look like criminals, but they looked like librarians or scientists. They wore white shirts and moved with a quiet, calm speed. This is Linda, Jae-hyun said, pointing to a woman with sharp glasses and gray hair. She is the best handwriting expert in the country. If a pen touched a piece of paper, she can tell you who was holding it and how they felt when they wrote. Linda nodded at Amara and clicked a button on her screen. A giant image of a signature appeared. It was Amara's name, written in elegant, flowing letters. At first glance, this looks like your signature, Miss Okoye, Linda said. Her voice was as dry as old paper. The loops are the same. The way that we tails off is perfect. But look closer. She zoomed in until the ink looked like a mountain range. When a person signs their own name, they do it with a certain flow. Their hand is relaxed. But this signature has tiny shakes. It shows that the person was drawing your name, not writing it. They were trying too hard to make it look like yours. Amara stared at the screen. She felt a cold shiver go down her spine. "I remember when this was supposed to have happened," she whispered. She closed her eyes and let her mind go back to 4 months ago. The apartment had been filled with boxes of white lace and samples of expensive invitation cards. She had just come home from a 12-hour shift at the hospital. Her head was thumping and her eyes were heavy with sleep. Ethan had walked in with a stack of papers and a warm cup of tea. He had kissed her forehead and told her how beautiful she looked, even when she was tired.
"Just a few more boring business things, babe," he had said, sliding a pen into her hand.
"The bank needs a signature for the new office equipment. I know you're exhausted, so I've already filled out the boring parts. Just sign here so we can go back to looking at the flower arrangements." Amara remembered signing something. She had been so distracted by the wedding, so blinded by the idea of their perfect future, that she hadn't even read the title of the page. She had trusted him with her life, so she had trusted him with her pen. "Wait," Amara said, opening her eyes. "He didn't just forge my name. He made me sign papers I didn't read, and then he used those signatures to copy my handwriting onto other, worse documents." "Exactly," another man at the desk said. He turned his screen toward her. This was the digital expert. "He used a light box to trace your real signature onto the $200,000 loan for Isabella's boutique. And while you were in surgery on October 14th, he logged into your personal laptop and sent 3 emails to the bank confirming that you wanted to move your inheritance money into his account." He showed her a map of the city on the screen. "Your laptop was at your apartment during those emails, but your phone and your ID badge were at the hospital. We have the hospital logs to prove you were in a trauma room at the exact minute those emails were sent. You couldn't have been in 2 places at once." Amara sat down in a nearby chair. The evidence was all there. It was cold, hard, and impossible to argue with. Ethan had used her hard work at the hospital as a cover for his crimes. He had waited until she was saving a life to steal her soul. He had used her love for him as a weapon to destroy her. "He was so careful," Amara said. "He didn't just get lucky. He planned every single day."
"He was careful, but he wasn't smart enough,"
Jae-hyun said. He was standing by the door, watching her.
"He thought you were a victim who would never look back. He didn't realize that every lie leaves a footprint."
Linda handed Amara a thick blue folder. "This is everything. The handwriting analysis, the digital timestamps, the hospital logs, and the records of where the money went. It's all verified. It's enough to put Ethan Caldwell in prison for a very long time." Amara took the folder. It felt heavy in her hands, but it didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a shield. She looked at Jae-hyun. "What now?" she asked.
"Now, we wait for the gala,"
Jae-hyun said. There was a dark, satisfied look in his eyes. "In 3 days, Ethan expects to receive the Businessman of the Year award. He has invited the whole city to watch his success. He thinks it will be his greatest night." Jae-hyun walked over and looked down at the folder in Amara's lap. "We are going to make sure it is a night he never forgets, but not for the reasons he thinks." Amara stood up. She felt a new kind of power flowing through her. She had been the strong one who carried everyone's weight. Now, she was the one with the truth. She wasn't just going to get her money back. She was going to take back her name. "I want to be the one to show him," Amara said. Jae-hyun nodded. "I wouldn't have it any other way. My people will handle the logistics. You just need to show up in that gold dress and be the queen you were born to be." As Amara walked out of the gray building, the folder tucked tightly under her arm, she didn't feel like a victim anymore. She didn't even feel like a nurse. She felt like a judge. The trial hadn't started yet, but the evidence was clear. Ethan Caldwell had built his world on a foundation of lies, and Amara Okoye was about to bring the whole thing crashing down. The grand ballroom of the Palace Hotel was filled with the sound of clinking glasses and expensive laughter. Huge crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a bright light over the hundreds of guests in their finest clothes. At the very front of the room, on a stage decorated with white lilies, a gold trophy sat under a spotlight. It was the Businessman of the Year award, and tonight, It was waiting for Ethan Caldwell. Ethan sat at the head table, looking like a king. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than a small car, and he kept touching his silk tie with a proud smile. Beside him, Isabella was draped in diamonds. She looked happy, but if you looked closely at her eyes, you could see a flicker of fear. She knew their bank accounts were still frozen. She knew her shop was closed. But Ethan had told her that tonight would fix everything. He believed that once he had this trophy, the investors would give him enough money to bury his mistakes. The music dimmed, and the mayor of the city walked onto the stage. "Tonight," the mayor began, "we honor a man who built an empire from the ground up. A man who shows us that with honesty and hard work, anything is possible. Please welcome our businessman of the year, Ethan Caldwell." The room erupted in applause. Ethan stood up, adjusting his jacket. He started to walk toward the stage, his head held high. But as he reached the steps, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Amara Okoye walked in. She was wearing the gold satin dress from the wedding, but she didn't look like the woman who had cried in the back row. She walked down the center aisle with her head high and her eyes fixed on the stage. Every head in the room turned. The gold of her gown shimmered like a sun, and the power coming off her was so strong that the applause started to die down. Ethan stopped on the stairs, his face turning a strange shade of gray. Isabella stood up at her table, her hand going to her throat. "Amara?" Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here? This is my night." "It is your night, Ethan," Amara said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the silent room, everyone heard it. "But it is not the night you think it is." She didn't stop until she was at the very front of the room. From the shadows near the wall, Kang Jae-hyun appeared. He didn't say a word, but his presence was like a dark shield behind her. He nodded to someone in the back of the room. Suddenly, the large movie screen behind the stage flickered to life. It was supposed to show a video of Ethan's successful buildings. Instead, it showed a giant image of a legal document. It was the $200,000 loan for Isabella's boutique. Next to it, the handwriting expert's analysis appeared in bright red letters. Forgery. The guests gasped. Ethan turned around, staring at the screen in horror. "Turn it off!" he shouted at the sound booth. "This is a prank! This is a lie!" But the screen kept moving. It showed the hospital logs from the night the emails were sent. It showed the bank statements where Amara's inheritance had been drained into Ethan's private account. It showed a video clip of Ethan in the bank, signing Amara's name while she was in the middle of a life-saving surgery. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a total eclipse of Ethan's success. The bright light he had built around himself was being covered by the shadow of his own crimes. Amara stepped closer to the stage. "You told everyone you built this empire, Ethan, but you didn't build it. You stole it. You stole from the woman who loved you, and you stole from the woman who called me a sister." She looked at Isabella, who was now trembling so hard she had to hold onto the table. "I hope the diamonds were worth the price, Isabella." "Because the bill has finally come due." 4 men in dark blue suits walked through the crowd. They weren't Jae-hyun's men, they were the police. They climbed onto the stage and stood on either side of Ethan. "Ethan Caldwell," the lead officer said, his voice loud and clear. "You are under arrest for identity theft, grand larceny, and multiple counts of forgery. You have the right to remain silent." The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest noise Amara had ever heard. It sounded like justice. Ethan looked at the crowd, then at the mayor, and finally at Amara. He tried to speak, tried to find one last lie to save himself, but there were no words left. He looked small. He looked weak. He looked like the thief he had always been. As the police led him out of the room, the guests began to whisper and point. Isabella tried to follow him, but a female officer stopped her, informing her that she was also needed for questioning. The perfect couple was being led away in shame, surrounded by the ruins of their stolen life. Amara stood in the center of the ballroom, the gold of her dress glowing under the chandeliers. She didn't feel happy about their pain, but she felt a deep, solid peace. She had stopped carrying their weight. She had let the truth do the work. Jae-hyun walked up to her and stood by her side. He didn't offer a celebratory drink or a fancy speech. He just looked at her with a look of pure respect. "The eclipse is over," he said quietly. Amara looked at the empty stage and the gold trophy that no one wanted to touch. She turned her back on the ballroom and began to walk toward the exit. She wasn't a victim, and she wasn't just a nurse. She was a woman who had fought for her own name and won. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she knew that the sun was finally rising on a life that belonged completely to her. 1 month later, the glass doors of the tallest building in the city opened for Amara Okoye. She didn't walk through the lobby as a visitor or as someone's fiancé. She walked in as the owner. The security guards bowed their heads as she passed, and the people at the front desk stood up straighter. The name on the wall had already been changed. It no longer said Caldwell Developments. In bold silver letters, it now said Okoye Legacy. Amara took the elevator to the top floor. When the doors opened, she walked into the large corner office. It was the room where Ethan used to sit and pretend to be a king. But the desk was cleared of his lies. The expensive scotch he kept in the corner was gone, replaced by a simple vase of fresh sunflowers. Amara walked to the large window and looked out at the city. From up here, the world looked wide and full of possibilities. She sat down in the heavy leather chair. It felt different than it had when she was just helping Ethan with his emails. It felt solid. It felt like it belonged to her. A stack of papers waited on the desk, but these were not forgeries. These were legal documents showing that the courts had returned every dollar Ethan had stolen. Because she had been the one to provide the original ideas and the startup money, the judge had ruled that the entire company was hers. There was a soft knock on the door. Her new assistant, a woman who actually respected her, walked in. "The board of directors is waiting for you in the conference room, Miss Okoye. They are ready to hear your plan for the new housing project." Amara nodded. "Tell them I will be there in 5 minutes." As the assistant left, another figure appeared in the doorway. Kang Jae-hyun was leaning against the frame, his hands in his pockets. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo or a disguise. He wore a simple black sweater and dark trousers, but he still looked like the most dangerous man in the room. "The seat looks good on you," he said. His voice was warm, but it still had that sharp edge that reminded Amara of who he was. Amara leaned back in the chair. "It feels good, but it's a lot of work. I spent so long building this for someone else. Now I have to learn how to lead it for myself." Jae-hyun walked into the room and sat on the edge of her desk. "You've been a leader for years, Amara. You led that ER team through nights that would have broken most people. You led yourself out of a trap that Ethan spent months building. This office is just a different kind of trauma room." Amara looked at him, her eyes tracing the dragon tattoo on his neck. "And what about you, Jae-hyun? Now that the debt is paid and Ethan is behind bars, what happens next? My world is about building things. Your world is different." Jae-hyun looked out the window. "My world is dangerous. It is full of people who only understand power. But it is also a world that needs people who can't be bought. People like you." He turned back to her, his gaze intense. "I didn't just help you because of the alleyway, Amara. I helped you because I wanted to see what you would do once you were free." "I'm not the girl from the alley anymore," Amara said quietly. "I know," Jae-hyun replied. He reached out and touched her hand, which was resting on the desk. This time, he didn't pull away. "The girl from the alley was kind. The woman in this chair is powerful. I think the city needs both." Amara felt a spark of something new. It wasn't the desperate, needy love she had felt for Ethan. It was something stronger and much more honest. It was a partnership. She knew that by staying close to Jae-hyun, she was choosing a path that wouldn't always be easy. There would be shadows and secrets, but she also knew that Jae-hyun would never ask her to be smaller so he could feel bigger. "I have a meeting," Amara said, standing up. She straightened her suit jacket and grabbed her tablet. "I'll be waiting," Jae-hyun said. He stood up too, walking her to the door. The black dragon doesn't go away just because the sun came out. Amara walked into the conference room. The men and women at the long table stopped talking the moment she entered. They looked at her with a mix of fear and admiration. She took her place at the head of the table, the empress's seat. "Let's get to work," she said. As she began to speak, Amara realized that the gold dress was now hanging in her closet, a reminder of the night she finally chose herself. She wasn't the strong friend or the loyal fiancé anymore. She was Amara Okoye, the woman who had turned her betrayal into an empire. Her story wasn't ending, it was just beginning. And with the black dragon at her back and the city at her feet, she knew she would never sit in the back row again.